Barack Obama got his BA from Columbia, his JD from Harvard. He taught for a number of years at the University of Chicago Law School. May I suppose that Tom Sowell is duly impressed?
You might say the road to hell is paved with Ivy League degrees. I remember years ago encountering a fellow who had been a teaching fellow at Harvard when I was an undergraduate. And I said to him, I've been noticing that whenever there's a great disaster, there always seems to be a Harvard man in the middle of it. He said, have you noticed that too? But if you believe in social justice and saving the environment, you're really something. And so the people with that viewpoint have a huge ego stake. And empirical evidence is like gambling all of that on a roll of the dice.
In this interview, Thomas Sowell will discuss his memoir, A Personal Odyssey, where he talks about his trials and tribulations throughout his career and his journey. I also have a link to the full audiobook in the description that you can listen to right here for free on YouTube.
Thomas Sowell, intellectual. We just learned that you started out as delivering telegrams. This was in New York. This was when you were living in Harlem. So you started out delivering. Now let's take you to age 24, when you're at Howard University. You write another book, well worth reading. They're all worth reading, but I love A Personal Odyssey. But I'm quoting from A Personal Odyssey in this case. Quote, I was a 24-year-old high school dropout with mediocre grades in a mediocre institution. Close quote. When did that change? When did your own intellect become engaged? When did the light bulb go on?
Oh, before then, but of course I was working during the day and going to school at night, which is not the ideal conditions for intellectual results. So I really didn't have the results.
But young Tom Sowell, what I can recall you were telling me that you would wait up at night, as I believe that this was when you were a teen, you'd wait up at night for the early morning edition newspapers to come out. You'd walk up the block at a little after midnight and buy the first edition newspapers at the newsstand, take them back to your bedroom and read them.
Yes.
So you were an intellectual when you were a boy.
I'm not sure that reading the Yankee scores made you an intellectual.
Oh, it was the Yankee scores. I feel so much better now. I thought you were engaged in world. I've always thought, Tom.
Can you imagine anybody in Harlem doing that today?
Walking around at midnight freely and without a kid. As
a small old white man had a little newsstand in Harlem, and he obviously had enough people doing this to make it worth his while to be open at midnight. And I would walk. It was a long block. I'd walk down this long block, get my newspapers, and come on back home and read them. A different world.
Quote, again from A Personal Odyssey, I graduated from Harvard magna cum laude. Economics and Karl Marx had a lot to do with it. Karl Marx got Tom Sowell through Harvard. Explain yourself.
Well, I had been taken by the Marxist philosophy, and therefore I had done a lot of studying. I'm one of the few people, I guess, who's read all 3 volumes of Capital and indexed them as I went. And from this, I wrote
This reading takes place before you get to Harvard.
I started, but at Harvard, I went through Capital. And that then provided me with an undergraduate honors thesis. And it's the honors thesis that got the magna cum laude. The grade point average was just enough to make me eligible.
I see. And you enjoyed yourself at Harvard and have revered that august institution ever since. Is that correct?
Not quite. I have never gone to a class reunion at Harvard. Even when I was teaching at Brandeis, which is about a 20-minute drive from Harvard. What I saw there that bothered me is what bothered me ever since. There was the sense that we don't really need to test for evidence. If all we bright good fellows all believe this, it must be true.
So you got the sense.
And then,
you got the sense of a kind of intellectual priesthood or caste.
Yes, and the same thing that you mentioned from the book, that there is this sense that you don't really have to go for evidence. That these are things that we all know.
Thinking it so makes it so. From Harvard to a graduate program in economics at the University of Chicago, quote, I was as well aware that the University of Chicago Economics Department had a reputation for conservatism, as they were that I was a Marxist. What made this not matter was that we were both devoted to intellectual standards. I developed much more respect for the University of Chicago than I ever had for Harvard, close quote.
Yes.
Explain the difference in atmosphere, intellectual atmosphere.
Well, in Chicago, you had to make your arguments. As some economists once said, at Chicago, economics is a full contact sport. And I don't know if you're aware of the back and forth that goes on. It's fierce. But the fact of the matter is that everyone recognizes you have to have facts, you have to have logic. You can't say that we believe this because everybody knows this. No, you've got to show how and why.
And you write about someone who became your close friend, Milton Friedman. You studied with Milton Friedman. Now, so here's a case, Tom, your thesis about intellectuals in society, that an intellectual is someone whose end product is ideas. Milton's end product was ideas, and yet he resisted all the temptations that you delineate in this book. He championed the free markets. He was intensely suspicious of the self-aggrandizement of intellectuals. He loathed Washington. In fact, I can recall some conversation, never went anywhere, but some conversation here at the Hoover Institution that we should move to Washington, and Milton said it would last 2 years and intellectually we'd be taken over. How did he, in strict terms, a man of ideas, and in that sense, an intellectual is intellectual, what set him apart? What made him different from the intellectuals in the pejorative sense?
In the preface to the book, I explain that I don't go into that.
I'm trying to get a little extra out of you here.
I did not try to explain every sparrow's fall. I'm trying to find what are the general patterns that we can see looking at intellectuals over the past 2 centuries. And I specifically say Milton Friedman is a classic example of someone who did not do it that way. Although Milton himself somewhere pointed out that at a very early period in his life, he was a Keynesian. He was certainly a liberal.
Okay,
But he moved beyond that. And a lot of people do. I would say most of the conservative intellectuals were at some point in their lives on the left. I mean, Hayek was a socialist. You can just go through the whole list of them. I mean, there are a few like William F. Buckley, who was a conservative from day one, but he was the exception, not the rule.
All right, so if you won't explain the sparrow's fall in Milton's case, explain it in yours. We've now got you to a graduate program at the University of Chicago, but you're still a Marxist.
Yes.
What were the circumstances? What was the intellectual journey that led you to reject Marx?
Well, it was not taking Milton Friedman's. I was a Marxist when I went into Milton Friedman's course. I was a Marxist when I came out.
You are just one tough Marxist. Anybody who could resist Milton. So what happened, Tom?
I went to work for the government as a summer intern in economics, and seeing the thinking or lack of thinking that was going on in the government, I realized the government is not where it's at.
So this ties back to the notion of empiricism. When you actually bumped up against the reality
Yes.
of the professional intellectual caste attempting to rearrange the lives of millions of people across this republic, you said to yourself, it's mediocre, it's second rate. What was it that you...
It was truly unthinking. It was also something else. The Labor Department had its own institutional interests. I was interested, for example, in whether the minimum wage law caused unemployment. And as I tried to come up with ways of testing that, I realized that the people in the Labor Department saw that as a threat. I mean, they were appalled as I gave some ways we might try to test this, because they had no desire to test the minimum wage law, which provided 1/3 of the funding for the U.S. Department of Labor.
I see.
And so once you say the government agencies have their own institutional interests, so don't look for them to serve the interests of others. I mean, to me, the question is, are all these teenage kids going to go without jobs and end up on the street and in crime and all the rest of it? That was not their top priority. And I realized other people's well-being would never be the priority of politicians and bureaucrats.
All right. After you leave government service in Washington, you go back to academia, where you've had a long and extremely distinguished career. You've taught at institutions that include Amherst and Cornell and UCLA. You've been a fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University for some 3 decades now. And yet, You've spent this time swimming, so to speak, against that tide, the intellectual tide that you describe here. I'm just probing one more time, and you feel perfectly free to swap me down one more time if you'd like. What made you different, Tom? What is it in your character, your background, what permitted you to resist these temptations, to see them in the first place?
Well, like others, I did not successfully resist them at first, but as time went on and more evidence accumulated, I wasn't as prepared as some others were to just keep explaining away all the evidence.
So it's your impulse toward empiricism. Let's test it, let's test it, let's test it.
Yes.
All right.
I really appreciate all the support you guys are doing. Let's keep this channel growing. And if you went through a similar path as Thomas Sowell, if you started out as a leftist or a Marxist, and you have woken up to a different path, go ahead and type in the comment, Marxists no more. Remember, in the description, there's a link to listen to the full audiobook for free right here on this YouTube channel. There's also an Amazon link where you can purchase the book. Also, check out some of these other great offers. I use all these services myself, and they help out the channel. Thank you again.